Welcome to the Healing Centered Conversations podcast, where we create space for conversations that heal. I'm your host, Dr. Byron McClure, a nationally certified school psychologist. I, along with our special guests, will give you insight to promote collective healing by putting people first. Through weekly conversations with educators, psychologists, and healers, we'll discuss ways to heal, thrive, and live your best life. This is the Healing Center Conversations podcast. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Healing Center Conversations podcast. I am your host, Dr. Byron McClure. And look, y'all, we have a very special guest in the building today. You might think that you're seeing doubles, but you're actually seeing my identical twin brother, Dr. Byron McClure. Thanks for being here with us, Brian. What's up, man?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we jump into it, I'm going to read this guy's bio, just so you know who we're talking to, and then we're going to get into it. Brian is the director of the DC Council Office of Racial Equity, also referred to as CORE for short. Prior to joining CORE, Brian served in several leadership capacities for Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie and the Council's Committee on Business and Economic Development. There, he helped lead the district's efforts to operationalize racial equity into the council's legislative process. He also helped provide innovative solutions to increase opportunities for the district's small and local businesses, and in particular, Black and minority-owned businesses. He received his bachelor's from Hampton University, shout out the real HU, and we're going to talk about some of the other things that he went on to do. When he's not working at CORE, he can be found roaming local bookstores. Look, we're going to have to talk about your bio. He can be found roaming local bookstores, somewhere in a local archive, barbecuing. We should talk and debate who's better there, or spending time with his wife and 2 children at their home in Ward 8. Welcome to the Healing Conversations, the Healing Center Conversations podcast. What's up, Brian?
I like my bio. I think it's pretty good, huh?
Look, it's all right, man. It's all right. We're going to talk about you roaming local bookstores, man. Right. But look, man, as we get into it, in my work, I often share a moment that was pivotal to my upbringing and really the work that I'm doing today, especially working in schools, working with youth. And really a moment that shaped that was growing up in PG County, attending one of the high schools in the county, and Miss Moore, our vice principal at the time. And Brian, do you remember it was the seniors versus the juniors, and we were wrestling. We were doing real knucklehead stuff. We were going through the hallways, and I caught one boy, and I had him up in the air. And as I was bringing him down to the ground, I remember seeing Miss Moore and hearing Miss Moore saying, "Byron, put him down." And we're midair and we're coming down to the ground. And she's like, "Get to my office now. Everyone get to class." And so I go to her office and she talks to me, and she's being restorative. She's being healing centered in her approach. And one of the things that she did, she pulled up my transcripts and she said, "You got enough time to be out here being a knucklehead, goofing off, but you're not even on track to graduate," because I didn't have any community service hours. And so she made me a manager of the STEP team, and she prioritized me getting back on track. She could have easily suspended me from school or any of the above, which is a zero tolerance approach, but she was restorative. She was healing centered. That went on, I was able to graduate because of her. And unfortunately, Miss Moore, she was tragically killed in a car accident on graduation. But that was a moment that was pivotal to me. And I went on in my work as an educator to be healing centered and restorative in everything that I do. So, Brian, I'm interested to hear, man, in your perspective, what has been a pivotal moment in your childhood? And really, I also would like to hear any impact that Miss Moore might have had on you.
Yeah, so first off, thanks for having me. Congrats on launching a new podcast. I think the work you've been doing is instrumental in shedding light on ways to heal, on restorative justice practices. The community is lucky to have you. I'm also lucky to have you as my twin. It's also hilarious for me to
Oh.
see you out here doing real grown up stuff. So, one of these days I'll have to come back and tell your listeners how, who you really are. But yeah, man, it's always good to reflect back on the influence of Miss Moore. Like, we may not have called it back then like restorative justice, what she was doing, but that's exactly what it was. I think if you ask any student that attended Friendly High School back in the day, shouts out to Friendly High School, class of 2004, they would be able to share those stories with you. One of mine was I was skipping class, and skipping class to get my hair done, no less. got
That's right, man. I forgot about that with
yeah,
the seashell braids.
yeah, and
Oh man, I forgot about that.
yeah, man, it happened. I think like a week before the state championship wrestling tournament, and so the principal at the time was like, "Yeah, you can forget about wrestling in that tournament." Which I worked 4 years to get to and qualify for, and it was Miss Moore who actually stepped in and said, "Like, no, like he's a good student, just made a mistake," and that stuck with me. And so she gave me an opportunity to correct the mistake that I had made. And so, I think taking these restorative practices, it may take different forms. We may use different language, but it has long lasting impacts on how people can perform long term.
Absolutely, man. And you took me back. I forgot, the fact that you had braids. One random fact, we're going to have to put the picture up. Brian, one way that people used to tell us apart is I always cut my hair close cut, clean, fade. And my brother, he always had long hair. He always had locks. Then he had the braids back in high school. So, fun fact, we'll have to put that picture up. And I showed this picture as a before. We went to colleges and all those things, and then I do it after as well. Man, and speaking of that, we went to Hampton University. We have been together our entire life, Brian, up until that point. And so after Hampton, we loaded up the act. We drove down all the way to West Texas, where I attended Abilene Christian University. And then
Car broke down once we got there.
the car broke down. That's right. It was so hot, man. The temperature was like 109. It was super hot. I feel like a tumbleweed rolled by. Yeah, man. Good times. And I remember we were in a grocery store, and he looked at me. He was like, "Man, what you doing?" But that was a pivotal moment. Me getting out of PG County, which is predominantly black, getting out of Hampton University, which is a HBCU, and then being in West Texas, man, where I was able to challenge some of my thinking and meet diverse people. And one of the biggest things is being away, from you for the first time. And that really had to help me and shape my identity and like, who am I? And like, can I stand on my own? And so I'm interested to hear from your perspective, man. What was that moment where I think you call flight, right?
Yeah.
And then you went to school, you went to North Carolina Central. So what was it like attending North Carolina Central? But more importantly, what was that moment being away and being on your own as a twin for the first time?
Yeah, man, it was funny because the first thing I was thinking about was like, well, daggone, I have to start driving because I just
you got to explain that one.
Like, yeah, I mean, ever since I got my license, I wouldn't drive. I just don't like driving. I still don't like driving to this day. Maybe one of the reasons why we live in DC is because we have access to public transportation. But yeah,
Right.
I just didn't like to drive, so Byron would always drive. And so once we split up, I had to figure it out for myself. But more importantly, I had to really start doing some soul searching and figuring out who is Byron McClure, not Twin. And for those of you who may be listening, like Twin was the nickname that I went by. Everyone just called me Twin. And so it would actually be weird. Like I would be in class or, walking around campus and people say, "Oh, hey, Byron." I'm like, sounds weird.
Yeah, man, same here. Dude, people would legit be like, "Hey, Byron." And I wouldn't answer. I wouldn't say anything. Because just like you, nobody ever called me Byron. It'd be like, "Yeah, what's up, twin? What's going on?" And when I got a text, they're like, "Byron." They're like, yo, they're talking to me. So that was different. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, just, we stayed in the same dorm at Hampton. We had separate
Mm-hmm.
majors, but like, pledged the same fraternity. Like a lot of the formative experiences that we had growing up were shared. And so that split created the initial opportunity for us to really start figuring out things for ourselves. And so I think it was one of the most like pivotal moments in our lives. Here I say our lives, like I'm speaking for you.
Right.
In my life where I had to venture out and start like making decisions like on my own, forming friendships on my own, like outside of the relationship that you and I had. And it was all like, it was all challenging in its own respects.
Man, absolutely. And so you go to North Carolina Central. And what did you major in while you was at Hampton and Central?
Yeah, I studied history at every level.
Ah, whenever man, so Brian studied history. I was a psychology major. And so I still don't really understand it, the history. And after
But I
Central,
studied
you went to
I studied the in part at Central. My master's thesis actually examined like psychohistory, what we call psychohistory, like the study of history. I mean, the study of the history of psychology. So it's like still kind of like interconnected.
absolutely. And so you studied that while at Central, which is fascinating, right? The how both of us, I merged to psychology, you merged to history, but even in your studies, the two kind of bridge together. Then you went to Memphis. You went to the University of Memphis. And what did you do while you were at Memphis?
So yeah, I also studied history, but was able to really dig into like the concentration was a little different. And so at North Carolina Central, I was studying U.S. history more broadly. And once I got to the University of Memphis, expanded it out to learn more about the experience of what we call the Black Atlantic, which at the time, this is what, 2010 through 2013, which is an emerging field. And so like we call it the field of the Black Atlantic or Atlantic world history. And so that led me to focus my dissertation on Booker T. Washington's efforts to recruit international students to attend Tuskegee Institute at the time, which is a historically black college founded in 1881 by Booker T. Washington in Tuskegee, Alabama.
Man, Brian, so how do you go from studying history to being the director of the Council Office of Racial Equity? Like, give us the path, the trajectory of how you went from history to being the director of the first office in DC.
That's a great segue, actually. It was a crazy path and extremely unexpected. I finished my doctoral program in 2013. My wife, Tracy, at the time, she had got accepted to her doctoral program at GW, so we moved back to DC. That year, in 2013, I was actually finishing up my dissertation. It finished in 2013. And so once I finished, I was like, oh, shoot, I got to work. And so at that time, it was still post the 2008 recession. The job market was still a little slow. And so the opportunities to teach at different universities, those opportunities weren't coming. I mean, I wasn't seeing the ones that I was just like falling in love with. Not that I had that much to choose from. And so I was like, well, what would it look like if I taught outside of academia? And like, how can I use these skills to contribute in other ways? And so it was actually Tracy who came across a random job posting for a campaign. I was like,
And Tracy is.
yeah, Tracy's my wife. Yeah, and so we've been together since Hampton. Shouts out to Tracy. And so I applied for this random campaign, like was hired to be the research coordinator and have been in DC government ever since. And so I went and worked at the DC Council, had an opportunity to go work for an executive agency and was brought back to the council. And at that time, there was a shift that was happening to focus on, how do we really focus on creating opportunities for Black and Native Washingtonians? And so I was able to really focus in and just started seeing all these gaps and opportunities to plug those gaps. And so that work, and you mentioned in reading the bio, was focusing on Black businesses. And so I started seeing all these gaps in the law. I'm like, well, it's the law that's like reinforcing some of these patterns of like racial inequities that we're seeing. I was like, well, we need stronger laws, but we also need to examine the laws that exist. And so we ended up writing the Racial Equity Achieves Results, or the REACH Act for short. that created 2 new offices, one Office of Racial Equity on the executive side and another Office of Racial Equity within the council. I was fortunate to be hired to lead that office and to set it up. And so that office launched officially in January 2021, and I've been heading it up ever since.
Now, when you say lead that office, what does that mean?
Yeah, so I'm the director of the office. Yeah, so I'm
Yeah.
the council office of racial.
You got a team?
Yeah, so there's 4 of us total. And we always like to say we're a small but mighty team.
Absolutely. Listen, so Brian, he is humble by nature. And so sometimes we got to pull that out. But that's a really big deal for a city such as DC, our nation's capital, to prioritize this office to where they're going to review bills to determine, if the bills are equitable or not. That's a big deal. And for you to be leading that work, that says a lot about the work that you've been doing, coming from PG County to doing this work. So shout out to you. And man, for our listeners, as the director of CORE, like, why does racial equity matter, right? Like, why should people care about that? Why is the work that you and your team doing? Why does it matter? Why does it matter? And why is it important?
Yeah, like if you go to our website, the first thing that you'll see is these big, a beautiful mural, but you'll see these words that says everything is a matter of racial equity. And so embedded in the founding of this country, much of Western society, is the fact, like this is not debatable, that these societies were created based off the exploitation based on race. And so from the founding of this country in particular, embedded in that is the fact that Black people have been exploited, that race has been used to determine like who wins, who loses, who has access, who does not have access. And laws that have been created perpetuate these systems that have been set up and institutionalized over time. So what we realize is that if we want to see true change, and it's important to say that when you look across the board, whether it's in health outcomes, education, like business outcomes, whatever it is, there's an abundance of racial inequities. And so if we want to start getting at that, we have to ask, well, why do they exist? But then how do you start to correct for it? That requires a lot of work. And that's what my office is here to do that hard work.
Yeah, man, and that work is so important. I remember a few weeks ago, me and you, we was having a conversation, and you shared a picture from, it was some decades ago, around the planning of the District of Columbia, in particular certain wards. Can you explain that picture and just kind of share like how the city by design was set up to create certain outcomes?
Yeah.
Talk about that for a little bit.
So it was a picture, I think, from like 1940 that said within a few decades, if you follow these steps, the majority of the Black population, they use the phrase like the Negro population, would be isolated and concentrated in what we now know is Ward 7, which is like the like Deanwood, like Bennett Road, like Minnesota Ave, like communities. And so you fast forward like 70 plus years, they've executed extremely well. And it happened by both government and private action. And so that picture, I think for me, when I was doing some research, I saw the importance of like how planning or lack of planning can lead to like the concentration of racialized poverty, and reinforce these patterns of racial inequities that we see. I mean, when I saw that picture, it stopped me in my tracks.
So, Brian, my work inside the public school system in DC, we did a little bit of what you're talking about, but we looked at it from a different perspective. Our thinking was that if these systems and neighborhoods and policies could get certain outcomes by being designed that way, then we can redesign them, set up new policies and practices, and create equitable systems. So, do you believe, just based on your experience, your knowledge, your understanding of planning, if these systems were designed to create the outcomes that they're getting, can we redesign them to get more equitable outcomes?
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing that we say, right? Like these systems that exist are designed in exactly the way how they were intended. And they are reinforcing these patterns of like segregation, these patterns of like racially inequitable outcomes. I mean, like one of the clearest examples is like, when I first started this job, people say like, oh, like why do you need, Office of Racial Equity in Washington, D.C. that like at one point was Chocolate City. And it's like, well, it's no longer Chocolate City, right? It's like they're like, oh. And I was like, well, why is it no longer Chocolate City? And so like, why is it that, you can have black police officers and black people are still disproportionately pulled over, harassed, more likely to be shot and killed by police, even though there's black officers. It's because they're like, it's not necessarily the individuals, it's the systems. And so like we always talk about needing to treat the systems and not, we'll be putting out some information soon, but we're not talking about just the symptoms of these systems, which may be the outcomes that we see. We're talking about treating structures. And so to get at these structures, you have to get at the groundwater, which is this whole great philosophy that was first pushed by the Racial Equity Institute that talks about, I know we don't have that much time, but if you just go look at the REI Institute and look at the groundwater approach, you'll see that they push to focus on treating the underlying causes, the root causes of what's causing these racially inequitable systems.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you brought that up. And from your work, I actually integrated that concept, and I tell it as a story: the fish, the lake, and the groundwater.
Yeah,
And just in a quick nutshell, that story challenges us not to just look at the individual issues, but to examine it from a systemic issue, the groundwater. Well, we can't even see at the surface, right? We got to go deeper to understand what's causing some of these systemic issues. So shout out to that. Switching gears a little bit, Brian. I always hype you up in work. People probably get tired of me talking about you, the work that you do. But one thing that a lot of people might not give you credit for, but is your networking ability and the relationships that you've cultivated. And people might ask me, do you have a person for this? Like, yeah. And I'll call you like, Brian, I need your help. Or like, Brian, you got to connect for this. Like, yeah, here's some food trucks. You got me connected. In fact, at the school where I was working, you got Step Africa just through the strength of your connections. So for the people that's interested, man, can you tell us how you go about networking with people and building cultivating really these strong relationships?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's a core tenet of the work that we do is that we try not to focus on policies like for people, but like we think about how do we build with community. And, a lot of times we don't think of the powerful and experienced like resources that already exist in our communities. And so I've been very fortunate through a number of different experiences to be put in touch and to work and learn from all these great people. And, one of the things about me, and I appreciate all the kind words you're saying, only thing that I know is that like you're only as smart as the people that you learn from. And so I'm humble enough to learn from those that are out here living this work every day. And so I always do my best to make sure that these relationships aren't transactional and that I'm really like learning from folks. And I think people have developed a certain level of respect because they know that I'm going to be genuine. They know that I'm not just going to reach out like when I need something. And they know that like whatever I'm doing is for the best interest of the community.
Yeah, what advice would you share with the listeners of things they could do to go about building a network of people or, just strengthening relationships?
Yeah,
If there was one key piece of advice.
just be genuine.
Be genuine.
Like
Yeah.
this, it can't be transactional. People see through that.
Excellent. Man, listen, I know you're a busy man, so before we wrap this thing up, man, you're a historian, a super bright mind, a very deep thinking type of individual, man. So I would want to know if you could have lunch with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I'll show you right here. It will have to be. I keep a photo of these two. I actually got this from the African American History Museum here in DC. It will either be Ida B. Wells or the homie Du Bois. And so
talk about it.
Ida B. Wells. So most people always talk about this like quote unquote controversy or like rivalry between like Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington is my guy. But like people don't talk enough about the contributions of Ida B. Wells. I have a random story about Ida B. Wells, but Ida B. Wells was one of the most courageous, most radical, intellectual like thinkers and activists like of our time. If it would not been for the courage of Ida B. Wells and the attention that she shed on lynchings that were taking place in this country, if it would not have been for her support of like the community, like small business owners, her strategic thinking, like there's a famous story of how she was literally helping Black residents in Marion, Arkansas, escape lynch mobs like during the night. And so, and like this is just like super random. I was doing some family research like a few months ago and discovered that at one point, like Ida B. Wells and her family were neighbors to some of our family. So it's like
that's wild. That's wild.
Like Ida Wells.
And our family is from the Arkansas, West Memphis, Proctor, Edmondson, Memphis, Tennessee area.
Yeah. And like, our family roots go all the way back to Mississippi, which is where a lot of the Wells family came from, Holly Springs, Mississippi, before she moved to the Memphis area before going to Chicago. But also, like, I just have to like say Du Bois. I mean, that's why I keep their pictures right here, because when I'm doing my work, when I'm going through challenges, I say like, how would Ida respond to this? How would Will, William, like Burkhart is like his real name, WP. Like, how would he respond to this? Like, how would he like philosophize about this, like, situation? So I know that went around the world to answer that, but here we are.
Listen, that's great. That's great, man. You're a wealth of knowledge, man. And Brian, as we bring the inaugural pod to a close, man, I just want to take this time to give you your flowers, man. Podcast, man. Podcast, brother. Okay. Listen, man, I want to, just thank you for, of course, the work that you've been doing, but like, man, you're pivotal to a lot of the work that I do, of who I am as a person, and literally, like, a lot of my work I do around understanding your strengths, around identity building, and my identity wouldn't be what it is without you. Like, when I talk about my identity, I got to talk about you. Right. I think because we were born together, but really just because
that may have something to do with it.
Yeah. But more than anything, man, like I look up to you. Like you're wise beyond your years, and you're doing life-changing work in a city that needs you, man. So keep going, my brother. Much respect, much love. Thank you for this healing-centered conversation. As we come to a close, let's keep healing, y'all. One thing, this was the first episode of the Healing Centered Conversations podcast. Y'all got to help us blow this thing up. Y'all can help us spread the word. Follow us on social media at Healing Centered Convos across all social media platforms. Subscribe, hit the like button, share. Let's blow this thing up. Brian is not used to this social media world. Brian, how can people find you? You got to give your socials to people, man.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I made the best way right now. If you want to learn more about the website, you can visit us at dcracialequity.org. Or if you want to follow me on Twitter, I guess I'm on Twitter too. What's your Twitter? Is it called a hashtag? What is it?
No, man. Listen, y'all, we gotta help this brother out.
It's a handle.
It's at Dr. HBCU, right?
Yeah, that's it.
We'll put it in the show notes. Listen.
I've started.
Come on, man. We gotta work with him.
These tweets take way too long. Hey,
we gotta help our brother out, man. Y'all go follow him. Blow his page up.
Hey, whenever I gotta get a tweet out, I gotta call you. You gotta walk me through how to do it. Like, what is this?
Man, we gonna get your socials up. You like a 50-year-old man. We gonna get that up. Coming up in episode number 2, we got the revolutionary principle, Amin Ra, and you don't want to miss that. Stay tuned. Take care, everyone. Bless you.